That'd be awesome. Can you adjust the definition, please?
How is summer being
Because it's showing on the side.
January?
It's like off.
Yeah.
Do you want to point it that way? Or
Hey, you're doing the intro, right?
Yes.
Could you also add in that I want the season vegetable?
Yes.
it's okay.
Sorry, I'm running out of space on
I
my
know,
sheet.
Is anyone there?
Yeah, I think this year was less stressful than I think this one.
Less stressful.
Less stressful. This was my second time, so the first time was a little hit and miss, but yeah, this time a lot less stressful.
Oh,
Could
could I just,
And that was for El de Sousa. Yeah.
D'Souza.
we just designate some different times as the first question. And you just pass it around. Each of us do one.
1, 2.
And then whoever wants to do the second one. That's sort of the way.
It's usually time for like 2 questions each.
Just four. Sometimes you just have three. Just four. It might be. See.
Yeah, sorry.
And if you don't have a question, just pass it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Are they going to do we need a mic for a question? Sometimes they have a mic, sometimes.
I think because they're facing forward, it should be okay. It's just that they wouldn't hear us if we're facing.
But it's also the sometimes they pass
People behind us would
they can't hear what we're asking.
Oh, they use the mic.
That's what it's saying.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said do they.
exactly what
I thought you said do they have a mic.
No,
Oh yeah,
sometimes
they're
they
passing
ask.
a mic around.
Pass a mic.
I think it's that box over there.
Okay, got it. That's right. We saw that.
No, they don't. But I think they said we should. Yeah. I think you're Al,
I didn't say hello, Jonathan.
yeah, I'll be there.
Okay, hello everyone. Hello. So we've got about 10 minutes or so until the first team comes in. So most of you haven't had time to read the case yet because you haven't been cracking it. So I'm just going to give a quick overview now so you have a better understanding of the presentations that you're about to see. So I mentioned on the first day of the competition that today will be a fun case. And I think one of the things that will make it fun is there'll hopefully be a lot of scope in here for the teams to get a large range of different presentations for us. So in terms of the client, we sort of have two different entities that are the focus of the case. One is Desio Nascimento and Notary Partners. Desio is an investor who's looking to purchase a master franchise, the the master franchise rights for the coffee in New Zealand. So the coffee is a Brazilian coffee franchise, and so the case is all about, should Desio proceed with purchasing the master franchise rights? And if so, how does he go about doing that? There's a lot of details in the case about what are the requirements for being the master franchise owner. And there are some details here about what's the best rollout for the master franchise, if he goes with that, as well as what to do with the supply chain and some of the other key decisions there. So Desio himself is from Brazil, where there's a lot of coffee, and he has relocated to New Zealand. So in the past he was working at Goldman Sachs, ran a global macro fund, relocated to New Zealand, and is looking to make an investment into the coffee here as the master franchisee. So for this case, they're strictly looking at this as a sort of business investment, which is why it is under the Norbury Partners umbrella as well. Desio unfortunately can't make it today because he is in Brazil, but he will be going through the recommendations and the recordings from the live stream, so the team's ideas will get seen by Desio. So in terms of some of the things that might affect this decision, coffee in New Zealand is obviously very competitive. We have a very strong coffee culture, so around 2 in 3 adults drink coffee daily, and quite a large number of New Zealanders drink more than 3 coffees a day. So there's coffee as a routine, and there's coffee as something which people love. So that does make the market quite dense in terms of the coffee per people, coffee per square meter in the urban centres, but it does also make it very competitive, and a lot of people do already have pre-established places where they like to get their coffee. In terms of some of the supply chain conflicts as well, we have the highest number of coffee roasters per capita in the world, and one of the highest number of baristas per capita in the world. So there's no shortage of some of those things. But there's also other considerations around that supply chain. So under the master franchise agreements, Desio has to set up warehousing and logistics for future franchisees in New Zealand as well. So on top of just warehousing and logistics, he then needs to think about the beans. So the beans are not part of the franchise agreement. So Desio has freedom over what he does with the actual coffee that people are drinking. So there's a whole range of options or a spectrum to pick from. So on one end, he could simply be buying roasted beans from a New Zealand roaster and using them in store. That would be similar to what a lot of the other New Zealand coffee providers are providing. On the far side of that spectrum, he could be importing green beans from overseas, so somewhere like Brazil or Indonesia, and then investing in in-house roasting capability to get a differentiated flavor. That is maybe a more complex and more capital-heavy way of doing things, but could perhaps lead to more differentiation as well. In terms of the asks here, so part of the master franchise agreement is also that Desio must open 5 own-operated stores. That's a minimum, it's not a maximum. So the teams are being asked about the format and what to do with those first 5 stores, and you can approach that in different ways. So one of the things that the coffee stands out for as a brand, you can notice here, even in the title, it's in English and it's in Japanese. It's a Brazilian company, but it's very much inspired by Japanese minimalism. And that comes through in things like the branding, but also in the products and their store layouts. So the very first store which they had was 3 square meters. It's very, very small. And they have a lot of one-person window coffee, which they do. So they try to keep the operating, the branding, everything about the company as minimalistic and simple as possible, which also has some operational benefits too. So Desio is initially thinking maybe that sort of small store format might be good for New Zealand, but it's a key question for the teams to consider. Do you want to maybe experiment across those first 5 stores to try with different formats? Do you want to experiment geographically? There's a whole range here for the teams to be creative and provide different approaches to that rollout. And again, they can simply say no. So the first question is a should, should Deschio do this, you can say no. And I'm hoping, as the case writer and the competition organizer, I'm hoping one team at least says no to give us a bit of differentiation between the teams. But that's about it in terms of summarizing the case. I think we've got a couple more minutes now, so feel free to talk amongst yourselves as we wait for the first team. Thank you. Already live streaming, or does it need
Oh yeah, ready to go.
So I'll hand the mic to
Hello, Eric. Hello. Aneshka, nice to meet you. Aneshka, nice to meet you.
Welcome everyone to the first team's presentation for the grand final of the 2026 Champions Trophy case competition. The team presenting now is Team Kerudu. On the judging panel today, We have Khorshid Terapur, from the Head of Risk Analytics and Reporting at Heartland Bank, Raymond Webb, an investment analyst at Industrial Equity LLC, El D'Souza, who works at in-house venture capitalist at Fonterra, owns Art and Bloom, a previous Champions Trophy case company, and is on the board of the Auckland Arts Festival, and Jonathan Mason, who has had a finance career with Exxon International Paper and Fonterra, and was an independent director for Air New Zealand, Vector, and Westpac New Zealand. The team will have 10 minutes to make their presentation, followed immediately by 10 minutes of questions and answers. When you have 2 minutes remaining in your presentation, I will hold up a 2-minute sign. When you have 1 minute remaining, I will hold up the 1-minute sign. You will be cut off at exactly 10 minutes, and the Q&A will start. For the audience, please remember there is no separate audio or visual recording of the presentation allowed. We also ask you to please remain silent during all the presentations. Team Kerudu, you may begin when you are ready.
When we have opened the case, what struck us most was Decius' love and passion for coffee. And this is something you cannot buy. However, we gotta make sure now that this passion does not fall through the cracks. With our strategy, Case and Coffee, we want to show you how we can implement a clear plan. We are Team Kerudu, and today Juan, Rebecca, Aneshka, and myself, Eric, we're gonna show you how you can implement this. So let's dive right in. You've asked the question, how can Decius establish the coffee in New Zealand to share his love for coffee with all Kiwis? And our solution, the Kaizen Coffee, an implementable plan for the next 2 years to make sure that we have all the coffee companies around New Zealand successfully implemented. This will allow you to have around 30 new stores in New Zealand, as well as an NPV of around 436,000 New Zealand dollars over the next 5 years. So Rebecca, take it away.
Thank you, Eric. Today, in our analysis, we see how the coffee has been greatly successful overseas, with your Brazilian and Japanese fusion. And it is clear that there is potential in New Zealand, where Kiwis treat their coffee like liquid gold. However, while your foreign identity might spark this initial curiosity, the real challenge we see today is how are you going to build credibility when they already have their established coffee and routine. Let's take a closer look at this target ICP. This is just an example. People who drink 3 coffees a day, they have very different coffee consumption patterns, and they go to different competitors for different needs. But we took a look at what we can learn from this. The first one is leveraging your brand story of country fusion while including these local roasters for that credibility. Secondly, explicitly showcase how quickly you can build these quality staples so they go to you and not fast chains. And thirdly, they go to their nearest area in the CBD. So by identifying these ideal micro-locations that have the highest foot traffic, you can guarantee to open these stores with low risk. But what stores do you need to build? We took a look at the different options given in the case and also threw in our own twist, a mobile format. Our key takeaways from this was a priority list, where you see that you have to validate that the coffee works in New Zealand with this mobile format first, then go on to these grab-and-go stores that have high foot traffic, and lastly, launch full flagship stores once you have this brand awareness where you can get a higher average order value per customer. So if we take a step back and look at what we've seen in our analysis today, we know that you have this initial curiosity, but need to earn this credibility. And your first step to doing this is partnering with local roasters while still communicating your brand story and where you come from. And lastly, leverage these mobile formats to identify the real hotspots where the coffee can grow in New Zealand. Now Juan, introduce us to our strategy.
Thank you, Rebecca. Today, our strategy for you is split into 3 parts. First, we're going to give you the store plan over the next 2 years. Then, everything that has to happen behind the scenes, such as your marketing and your infrastructure build out. And finally, your franchise playbook, so you can grow past the initial 5 stores.
We know that your number 1 priority is to validate interest in this concept, which is why that your first store that you open won't be stationary. We recommend that you launch the coffee truck, and this will be a coffee truck that will be traveling around the Auckland region to test different hotspots and generate visibility. And we know that this is a good idea because it also balances visibility with this initial location risk. The next stores that you will be opening will be the next 3 compact locations in Auckland CBD district where there is high foot traffic from commuters. And finally, your 5th store will be a flag Auckland to support more brand awareness and credibility in Auckland. And our location strategy for these stores will be informed by where your competitors are. And we know this has worked because this identifies where hotspots are. And for example, when Burger King was scouting locations for its next stores, it looked to exactly where McDonald's already was. But let's take a look at what happens inside these store formats. We want to keep a few things and adapt some things to New Zealand. What we will keep is your operational model because it already fits exceptionally well into the Kiwi lifestyle and what you offer as coffee. Your Japanese aesthetic and the technology you offer also align with your principles and work extremely well in New Zealand. But what we will adapt is introducing local coffee roasters, a blend into your coffee offerings, as well as adapting the menu for addressing trends that New Zealand people like and align with your identity, such as matcha. And finally, we'll also be implementing parts of your New Zealand and company identity together into the store design, which Juan will expand later on.
Thank you, Aneshka. Now that we know what's happening within the stores, we actually need to grow your brand and make it recognizable to every Kiwi in Auckland. So how are we going to do this? It's split into 3 parts. If you see on the top left of the slide, pre-launch, this coffee truck that Aneshka was mentioning is going to take a tour for a few months so that we can test out which locations are working best. Then on the bottom left of the slide, every time you launch a new store, we want you to do the flat white timer challenge. If your staff can make coffee in under 60 seconds, the customer pays. If not, they get the coffee for free. And finally, what's going to be recurring is heritage art. We know that you're a mix of Brazil, Japan, and also now New Zealand. Therefore, we want to be showing the people that are involved in this coffee from its sourcing to its making in every one of your stores. Now, we keep moving, we see what has to happen behind the scenes. And this is your infrastructure, your supply chain, and your launch team. Most importantly, we want to be shipping unroasted beans from Brazil, want to be roasting them with a local partner at first, and then shipping them using a third-party provider. And for your launch team, you're going to be hiring 4 people, okay? Now, 5 stores are launched. We just finished our 2-year plan. What has to happen next so you can keep expanding? Let's take a quick look at our franchise playbook. Now, Jonathan, imagine that you wanted to launch a The Coffee franchise. This is what you would receive. A packet explaining exactly where to get the furniture for your store fit out, which would be on the franchisee platform. How to hire, which we can help you with, and what to do about your operations so we retain the most important part of the coffee, which is the efficiency. Also, at the bottom of the slide, you can see you would get a day with Desio, where Desio would come to your store and would show you the ropes, so he makes sure that you have a smooth start and a successful franchise from then on. Now, if we keep moving to the next slide, we can see your implementation timeline for the first 2 years and then the subsequent 3 years after. The most important thing I want to point your attention on is what you have to do tomorrow in order for this to be a success. And that is, for example, getting quotes from local coffee roasters so you can ensure that your unit economics are still on point. Exactly. Now, Eric, walk us through the impact of our strategy.
Of course. In order to make all this happen, especially the first 5 stores, we want Desio to invest around 800,000 New Zealand dollars over the next 2 years, because one store will roughly cost around 105,000, as well as on top the fees that you need to pay in order to be allowed to set up your stores. We've roughly calculated that you will be able to implement 3 compact stores in the first year and 2 stores in the second year. You can see on the top right a rough distribution of how much the operational expense will be, but at the bottom I want to point your attention there, your capital expenditure will only be limited to the first and second year, because then all the other stores, the capital expenditure will be extrapolated to your new franchises. If you go one slide further, however, you can see on the revenue slide that your revenues will gradually build up, and especially on top of the revenue bar chart, you can see the fees from the other franchises you are gathering, which is exactly the money you want. It's the almost cash flow positive free money that you want to get, and where you only have the additional fee that you need to spend to the coffee. Our key assumptions you can see on the top right, where we've assumed that the average order value for a compact store is around 6.3 New Zealand dollars, just because simply these stores are quick, where people just grab a coffee and go. However, the flagship stores, people have the opportunity to sit down properly, and therefore most often either order 2 coffees or order a pastry, which then leads to a rough average order value to 12. We've seen from the case that you can have around 50 to 60,000 foot traffic daily, which we converted with a conversion rate from 0.5 to 0.8%. And also all your stores should operate basically every month with 30 days. This will allow you to be cash flow positive by year 2 and as well to have an NPV of $436 million by end of year 5. So if we zoom out and think about everything we've heard today, we first want you to make sure that you can implement 5 stores successfully, and then with these 5 stores from your key learnings, we want to make this playbook to make sure that all your new franchisees will be able to expand successfully. Thank you very much. We would now like to open the floor for questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I'll kick off the questions if that's all right with the other judges. I like the coffee truck idea, assuming that it's permissible under the franchise. How are you going to decide where to position the coffee truck in Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga?
Of course. So the coffee truck initially will be centered in Auckland's CBD because these are the first areas where you need to decide will you be opening these stationary compact stores. So we'll be, if permits are available, positioning it in different areas around Auckland's busiest sections to see where we should open these stores. And in the other 2 cities, it will be also located in these main areas to see if there's enough demand to justify a franchisee there in the future.
Thank you.
You want to just go over
it? One thing I didn't hear that I suspect is important, but interested in your view, is consistency. So if someone goes to any one of the 5 stores, are they going to get the same coffee taste? And the reason I bring it up is just training baristas becomes important, and getting a consistent roasting. Roast is important. In your front slide said roasters. And then 4 slides in, it said no, roaster. How do you think about consistency?
Yeah, so we saw consistency as one of the main customer needs over here, and it's not only the menu of having staple menu items they can reliably always see, but also what you pointed out, the roasting. So the way we saw it is we're going to work first with one local roaster, and all of our coffee is going to come from this roaster. However, since it's a partnership, in the future, if we see that we need to switch local roasters, we have the ability to do so to further adapt to local tastes. So this just gives us the flexibility.
Thank you. So the name of the coffee is rather generic. How much of the 100K USD is for the brand and how much is for the technology? If we built our own app or tablet to make orders, could we save the money?
Yes, of course, we go to this first appendix slide. The 100,000 that I've mentioned, so the 105 per store, is usually attributed to the own 5 stores that you're going to spend on. So for example, now we made it to the slide, exactly. You can, sorry, to the third appendix slide. It mainly consists of the furniture, the due diligence.
So I'll just stop you there. So by the 100K, I meant the USD franchise fee.
Oh, sorry, apologies.
That you're paying the coffee
Yes.
for the master franchise agreement.
Yes, your question is there, how much is going to be attributed?
How much is attributed to the brand versus the technology? And could we just build an app ourselves rather than paying the 100K to save that money?
Understood, okay. So we thought we didn't think much about if we should do this step or not. We thought this $100,000 fee up front is the money we need in order to be able to operate. And that money is just a fee, so we have no power whatsoever what goes with that money. That was our standing. Does that clarify your question?
Thank you so much, team. I have a quick question regarding the mobile stores, the coffee trucks. A lot of your implementation and your strategy stems on those. What happens if the validation doesn't work and essentially those trucks do not see much demand?
Of course, so there's 2 different options that we thought of while solving this case. Desio wanted a low-risk strategy to validate the idea, which is why we went with mobile. So the first idea we have as a contingency plan is if within this golden triangle there is no success, we could try relocating the truck to the South Island, maybe to Queenstown or Christchurch, as there are also busy metro areas there. However, if this also doesn't succeed, and we believe that we've done a good job with kind of driving this truck around and selling the right coffee, then it's just maybe the coffee doesn't have that much potential in New Zealand. However, we strongly believe that because Kiwis love coffee this much, and the coffee has been such a huge success overseas, this won't be the case.
Eric, what discount rate did you use to get the NPV and how did you calculate it?
Of course. I can directly say this is of course an estimation. We haven't been given the WACC, for example, and no capital structure. So we just assume 10%, which is the rough estimate everywhere.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned unit economics. I would have thought that at the core of the proposition is a simple unit economics measure, which is the sale price per cup of coffee versus the cost of the milk, coffee beans, put aside even wages because that's sort of semi-fixed. So the unit economics is extremely important. Did you have enough information to calculate that, or what did you assume on that?
Yes, I can happily take that as well. If we go to the third appendix slide. First of all, we of course had a time constraint, so we really I apologize for the bad writing as well. But you can see at the bottom right, point 9, I tried to quickly do it in the last 5 minutes. We've calculated that the average value for a flagship store, for example, is 12 New Zealand dollars, and the cost per order is around 8.2 New Zealand dollars, which then allows us to have 4 New Zealand dollars in rough profit per unit, which then allows us to have the break-even quantity of 3,800, if I can read my writing as well correctly.
Okay, so when you say $12, does that mean $12 per cup of coffee?
That's per order of the flagship store, so it would be 6.
Oh, in a flagship store?
Yes.
Okay.
I would have done it for the small store as well, but again, 5 hours.
Thank you.
As a venture capitalist, this is a relatively risky venture. Do you think 10% return is sufficient?
Yes, of course, because we're not starting a new business itself, right? We are operating under a franchisee operator, so which means we have the success rate from the other countries as well. We've seen the coffee has worked very, very well, and that's why we have assumed 10%. But of course, this was again just a rough estimate. We can also increase that number in WACC.
Also, this is assuming our entire strategy, but because the coffee truck is the initial part, as we mentioned, if this is really a big flaw and there's no demand for this type of coffee in New Zealand, then you don't have to make subsequent investments in the next 4 stores.
Sorry to ask another finance question. I'm just looking at the revenue on appendix, I think 1 or 2, and it's 1.36 million for the first year of operation across 2 stores. Just a very, very quick calculation, if you're selling at $5 each, brings out that you would have to sell 93 coffees an hour. Do you think that's feasible given the competition that's currently in New Zealand?
Yes, we definitely think that's feasible. I would try to break it down to 93 coffees an hour. So we think the foot traffic is the main thing that argues for this case, right? So because we have these grab and go coffees, so we don't have actually people spending a lot of time in the store, but they actually just grab them. So that's where we think it's definitely possible. And Juan also mentioned the strategy. We have this competitive aspect of that you want to make this coffee under the time constraint, so actually the customers also pay for it. So I think we also give our employees enough incentive to make this coffee very, very quick.
So the Brazilian company has only been going 8 years. There's only 70 stores outside Brazil, and there are restrictions on transferring a franchise if DCO decides he wants to get out of it. Does any of that give you pause?
Of course, that's why we went with a little bit of a more careful model and kind of considered the mobile store first, because again, if that doesn't succeed, we don't want to keep investing. And another way we kind of saw it is, even though there's a risk of transferring this franchise later on, we know from other proofs of concept of other franchises that, for example, you could transfer the franchise to a very successful manager of one of the coffee stores, right? So even if Defio wanted to exit, if everything is going well, the franchise ownership should be possible to transfer to a manager that has experience with one of our stores.
Yeah, that 60-second pledge. Being a frequent coffee user, I'm going to sort of gently challenge you a little bit. So 60 seconds isn't from the time I go into line at the store, I don't think.
No, correct. Once you order
Okay, so 60 seconds isn't maybe even when I order it, if they've taken 3 orders right before me, there's 4 people in line, they take the orders. That's not 60 seconds.
Correct.
It's when they start working on my coffee. And if you thought about the gap between what a customer might perceive in 60 seconds, because what you really care about is when you walk into the store versus what you're really promising.
Of course. So the way we consider it is, in the case they told us a lot of your stores in Brazil, for example, have digital displays, right? So as soon as you walk into the store, you buy your coffee, when you pay, the 60-second timer comes up. Okay, and of course this time can be 60 or 80 seconds, but that is exactly why the employees want to keep that efficiency and bring you the coffee as soon as possible. But of course, if you think you're losing a lot of money because they can't keep up, you can up it to 70, 80 seconds, something competitive.
The best coffee cart locations, best coffee shop locations tend to already be taken, and they're already quite popular spots. They can be quite hard to come across new ones that will be in a good place. What makes you think we can get the 5 stores in prime locations within the 2 years?
Thank you, team, for your presentation. That is now coming up. You can now find your bags in the back of the room. You are free to watch the other presentations in the final, but please do not return to your preparation room upstairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's what?
I said 10% return, that's less than I got in the S&P 500 in the last 6 months. So they usually take a general range of like startup, established company, like this is the whack you should expect.
Franchise myself.
I saw you were formerly on some pretty interesting boards. Like, are you currently doing boards?
I'm on Sanskrit.
On Zesco?
Very similar to Frontier.
Yes.
That's what I love Sanskrit. And a lot of my products. So shipping.
Welcome to the second team's presentation for the grand final of the 2026 Champions Trophy case competition. The team presenting now is Team Tarapunga. On the judging panel today, we have Khorshid Tarapour, Head of Risk Analytics and Reporting at Heartland Bank, Raymond Webb, an investment analyst at Industrial Equity LLC, El D'Souza, an in-house venture capitalist at Fonterra, the owner of Art and Bloom, a previous Champions Trophy case company, and is also on the board of the Auckland Arts Festival. And finally, Jonathan Mason, who has had a finance career with Exxon International Paper and Fonterra, and was an independent director for Air New Zealand, Vector, and Westpac New Zealand. The team will have 10 minutes to make their presentation, followed by 10 minutes of questions and answers. When you have 2 minutes remaining in your presentation, I will hold up a 2-minute sign. When you have 1 minute remaining, I will hold up a 1-minute sign, and you will be cut off at exactly 10 minutes. For the audience, please remember there's no separate audio or visual recording of the presentation allowed, and we kindly ask you to remain silent during the presentations. Team Tarapunga, you may begin when you are ready.
Without coffee, I can only imagine that 2/3 of you right now would not understand a single thing that I am saying. But if the coffee were to enter New Zealand, this would never be the case. Good afternoon, judges. We are so excited to present to you our solution, Taking Warmth to Go, where we plan to build 5 to-go stores, 1 flagship store across 3 main cities. But when being a major franchisor, there are 3 main constraints that need to be considered. There is 1 big upfront cost, as well as there is a need to build 5 completely company-owned and operated stores within 2 years, as well as there is a need for a long-term commitment. And there's 3 considerations that we've thought when making up this plan. Number 1, what stores, how many, and what will be the format, and what will they serve? Number 2, where are we gonna have them, in what cities, and specifically, what neighborhoods? And third of all, what do logistics look like? How do we source, where do we store, and how do we roast? Now, moving on, we analyzed the New Zealand market and identified 3 main characteristics. Number 1, we saw that premium coffee is a baseline expectation, as well as this is a small market with high operating costs. And third of all, New Zealanders are very relationship driven, really placing high quality on drinking coffee with one another. Therefore, we need to adapt the coffee's offerings to this market and these characteristics. And how do we start? Well, we've segmented the customers into 4 main buckets, and we've chosen to target the young professionals. Now, you may wonder why. Well, we've identified that these drinkers are the most prominent as well as the most willing to pay for this premium coffee every day. They have this habit of going out, wanting to spend time together, and are always on the go. Leading us to our key question of how can The Coffee launch and enter New Zealand to achieve 5 stores within 2 years?
Thank you, Armil. And our answer to the key question is The Coffee Partner, taking warmth to go with us.
So
with store format. So we did actually consider a different solution. For example, all coffee windows, but it's immediately no for us because it's gonna take a lot of time and not really showing the warmth to the New Zealand culture. At the same time, for all coffee stores, it's also another no for us because the food is not really adding value, it's relatively low margin. Therefore, it comes to the third option, a mix of coffee bars and flagship stores. Let's start with flagship stores. We're excited to introduce the flagship stores, which is the beginning of the coffee in New Zealand. We want to show the brand vision of premium and warmth. With premium, we will keep introducing the minimalistic design, also the Brazilian coffee beans, to really put coffee as the center of attention. At the same time, we want to make the flagship store as a community hub for family and friends to hang out in the weekend. To bring your attention to on the right-hand side of the slide, it's a simple diagram of what the store is going to look like. We have a clear place for order, at the same time, a place for people to hang around and enjoy. Moving on, let's see the coffee bar. This time I'll show the floor plan first. We want to keep the enjoy component on the bar so that we're still keeping an area for a customer to enjoy. At the same time, keeping the order and pickup counter clear so that we can keep the grab and go culture. So what does it mean for us, B-Coffee? So for us, not only is it a faster setup, lower rent, and we can target the right customer in New Zealand. At the same time, for our customer, it's more convenient, at the same time, easy grab and go, having a both positive in-store and to-go experiences. To add on, we would like to introduce a new international menu that is simplified in our coffee bar, and of course the flagship store as well, so that in terms of scaling up, it will be more efficient. At the same time, it will be more beneficial for us to increase the store size in the future as well. Last but not least, we will also want to create a replicable playbook for the coffee. Some examples are enlisted on the slides. For example, the scent diffuser, of which for Muji, we really want to create a standardized image for the coffee. A proof of success is from Fonterra, which we understand that and we learned that they use a standardized machine for their cheese so that it not only improves the quality control, but at the same time, really creating the customer satisfaction and premium brand image for our customer. Next, we want to take a look at which locations would be most critical for the coffee to enter into. And to do so, we analyzed key areas throughout New Zealand, but essentially we prioritized the propensity for locals to consume to-go coffee, as well as the city density in which these areas would be most convenient. And we determined 3 primary cities. First, starting off with Auckland. As Auckland is the center and we wanted to establish the brand throughout New Zealand, we determined that Auckland, opening the flagship and a bar within here for the first 2 months, would be most successful. Next, within the next 10 months, moving on to Hamilton and implementing 2 more coffee bars, as this is a very growing area and it's also nearby Auckland, which we thought would simplify the logistics and the implementation phase. And then finally, within the 15 months, we propose also opening 2 more bars in Wellington. And so this location strategy would allow for more consistent and reliable growth throughout this northern island.
And third of all, the most important, the supply chain and the logistics. How does the coffee get to the stores? Well, we had 3 different paths to take, but we ultimately chose to import the green beans and roast them locally with a partner. We understand that this is an asset-light business and we've been able to scale in the past being asset-light. Therefore, by building a roasting facility as well as buying our own warehouses right off the bat, that would not be worth it, as well as, once again, we have to make this in 2 years, so there is urgency needed here as well. And by having the roast locally, we can ensure freshness as well as faster iteration to suit and to find local blends that fit the local palate taste. And moving on to the warehouse, we believe that we can leverage the Golden Triangle location. Specifically, we've identified that here there's a growing warehouse presence and space with a lot of trusts coming in and being able to buy out building warehouses, as well as office spaces. We believe that by starting off in the short term, renting the space, it is cheaper for us as once again, it's asset light, as well as the proximity to our locations, Auckland first and then Hamilton second.
So, it's been 2 years and you are now ready to franchise. So what does this actually mean and what did these past 2 years look like? Primarily, you know that already you've set up your first flagship store and bar in Auckland in month 2, as well as expanding to Hamilton in month 10 and Wellington in month 15. You've already established your market presence through this flagship store as well as additional marketing, and you're ready to buy your master components and you're ready to franchise. But when you franchise, it's essential that you bring a consistent consumer experience and brand identity. So how will we do this?
We wanted to standardize the process of purchasing coffee at these bars and flagship stores, so we proposed implementing 3 primary loyalty initiatives. From before you buy your coffee, with local messaging, where they detect if you are, for example, 2 minutes away from a bar. Then, throughout the process of purchasing your coffee, having pre- and auto-filled forms to standardize your typical coffee order. And afterwards, post-coffee, having a warm message thanking you for buying from the coffee and wishing you a nice day.
Just to expand on the case study, we know this has been successful through a few key metrics. So first, this location-based messaging is something that a lot of consumers want to opt into. When you're expanding so quickly in franchising, oftentimes consumers don't know what's next, and so this can help them get a sense of where the coffee is near them. Moving on to impacts, we see that the expanding for 5 stores in 2 years is quite capital intensive, but we're able to see break even in only 2.5 years due to the high margins in the coffee business. By keeping our menu light and keeping our costs relatively light with 6 square meter coffee bars, we're able to keep the cost low and see that break even just as we start the franchising model. So moving on to a few key risks that we laid out. The first is primarily in terms of the roastery. We see a key dependence on this partnership, and there's a few ways to mitigate this, both by finding 2 trusted sources, where you could do one type of Brazilian bean in one roastery and one type in another to maintain consistent costs, as well as managing your FX and commodity exposure through futures and forwards. So the key here is to maintain your agility with these small stores and being able to test as you go. Ultimately, this helps you establish 6 stores, 1 more than you even need to, in New Zealand by year 2, as well as using North Island as a hub and eventually building south towards Wellington as a hub for the future South Island expansion. We see this high profit margin, and ultimately this helps you bring warmth to New Zealand. Thank you, and we're now open to any questions you may have.
Thank you for your presentation. Given that there are 1.8 million people in Auckland, 210,000 in Wellington, and 192,000 in Hamilton, why don't we have more stores in Auckland and forget Hamilton and Wellington?
Yeah, I think if we could go back to the all the locations, part of this is about national presence. And so by only focusing in Auckland, it becomes an Auckland-centric brand, but we don't want to just do that. We think that with franchising, it's critical to establish a few key presences in different hubs so that when these franchisees, which may want to have presences in Hamilton or Wellington, are established, there's one owned and operated by the coffee in those areas already to set the standard.
Thank you.
It's on one of your appendix. And the unit pricing, I understand it says basically, the way I read this bottom, okay, just a second. Let me tell you. Pricing expected sales is the title for it. Great. Now, in that bottom right, I understand how you get the 638. The net margin, that means that of the 638, 30% is variable, so cost of goods, the cost of the coffee, cost of the cup, whatever, right? How did you get that?
Yeah, so
the 447 seems. Was there enough information in there? Okay, that's how you got it.
We baselined off of these numbers from the case, so we assumed that about 10% would go to those roasting costs, or possibly even more. So I think maybe 30 to 40% would be reasonable in total costs, as well as logistics. We think, especially with the first 2 stores being in the Golden Triangle, would be a bit lower, and then raw materials importing from Brazil would be a bit cheaper because we're doing the beans and not the roast, post-grinded and roasted.
Okay. It was an assumption.
It's an assumption,
And you
yes, that's correct.
A local coffee shop can open with $0 in franchise fees and $0 of royalties. What exactly are we buying for the USD 100K franchise cost? And what are we buying for that would make us more resilient?
Sorry, just to make sure I understand your question, you were asking for the motivation and goal behind the $100 US?
Yes, why pay that to the coffee rather
Yeah.
than other alternatives that you might have considered?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is actually a requirement that comes with this agreement, that the master franchise agreement is being proposed to Desio, the coffee itself. This agreement and him taking these master franchise rights would actually require him to have to pay $100,000 in US dollars upfront as a capital commitment requirement. So that is something that we considered when building out, because it is very capital intensive from the go, as he has to buy the rights to be able to do this master franchising. And therefore we have to measure, are these stores and the impact that we're going to have with our solution going to be able to match this requirement that he has to take on by just taking on the label of the coffee?
So why pay that, and did you consider any other alternatives instead of going down the coffee route?
In terms of why franchise in the first place?
Yes.
Yeah, so we thought about if this was a good move in the first place because it's such a large ask. You have 5 stores that you need to open in 2 years, and it doesn't seem like a capitally efficient measure. But then when you take a look at the unit economics of each store, we think that it is a good move long term because each of these bar style stores is so easy to set up, and therefore by operating and earning about 50% from each of these stores, we think that it's a really efficient way to expand.
Thank you, team. My question is regarding your flagship store. Why have you chosen such a high capital intensive as a starting store, and do you think it's the smartest idea for Auckland?
Yes, I guess I can start to answer this question first, because for us, after understanding the case and the need of the company, we think it's extra important to set the brand image as the first step to enter the market, because we are different from other coffee stores in New Zealand. We're really positioning premium at the same time staying warm. I guess that would be so important.
I think a key component is this warmth aspect. If you have these coffee windows that people are just grabbing to go, they have so many alternatives, and quite honestly, they might not be willing to pay that price point and have that loyalty. But by having, as Corinne mentioned, somewhere that you can go on the weekend by the Auckland Domain and have a nice experience, they're able to feel that experience on the daily when they pick it up from the box.
And sorry, would it just be coffee or would it be food as well?
For now, at an earlier stage, we will prefer just coffee, as this is our main target and focus for now.
Can you please explain what type of margin this 38.4% margin is and how it relates to the 70% gross margin per cup of coffee?
Yep. So the 70% margin is in terms of cost of goods sold, but not including the capex and all of these expenditures. So in terms of the profit margin by, I guess we took a look at how much sales per quarter based on assuming about 20 cups per hour in the flagship store because it's a little bit larger and you have more counters, and about 10 cups per hour in the faster to go locations with high turnover but only one store. And so we used that to get gross margin, and then we took into account operating costs. I believe it's on this first slide, but for example, just the setup costs as well as hiring 5 employees for the flagship store and 1 employee for the operating store, as well as any interior design and remodeling of the store.
So the 38.4% is the pre-tax margin?
Pre-tax, that's correct.
I have a really specific question on your page 21, the loyalty initiatives.
Yep.
Apologies, it's really getting into the weeds, but the airport works really well because if you're at an airport, you're not usually there. If you were 2 floors above your coffee shop, you don't want to be getting location messaging continually all day, right? Could you think of maybe turning that off? Did you think about that?
Yeah, of course. This is also something that we considered, which is why this would be an opt-in option. So
Okay.
it's not for any user who has this app. You'd have to opt in to actually receive these notifications.
So to turn it on if you're right above.
Yeah, you can turn it off, yes.
Another way we thought about it is it's kind of like a new location discovery, so it would probably turn off for locations that you've already visited, and that would also be encompassed in the app. But for example, if you're from Auckland and you're visiting Hamilton for the weekend, it would notify you that your favorite coffee bar is just around the corner.
You've gone with a bit of a high-cost model here with the flagship store and also the loyalty initiative requiring some upfront tech costs. If this were to fail, how much of this cash can I claw back versus how much is sunk and lost?
I can jump in but I think it's relatively light in terms of the interior design and the equipment costs needed, because that equipment could be reused in a new location. For example, if the New Zealand market is decided to be too small, you have international locations or other alternatives, for example, in Australia. I think we chose to keep it relatively asset light, as Ramel mentioned, in terms of choosing rental locations, shorter contracts, and being able to kind of pilot it without having too light of a model, so that there is a significant footprint for those stores.
Thank you. Currently, New Zealand is facing a massive liquidations problem with hospitality, and hospitality is number one in most liquidated in New Zealand. Why do you think this is the right time to launch this, and also how do you actually differentiate yourself from the hundreds of competitors in the coffee scene in New Zealand?
That's a great point, and looking at the hospitality side of the industry here, we've identified, actually, if we can go back to the New Zealand market characteristics, that New Zealand's, especially young professionals like us, are really relationship driven. We love to spend time and find these third party spaces that are very key for us to hang out outside of work, post school, whatever it is. And therefore we feel like it is crucial to find these spaces that bring us together. And we feel like the coffee also has this differentiating element to it. It has those sleek designs, the futuristic feeling, the premium offering that none of the other coffee stores currently are offering. It also offers this international side to it, the Brazilian sourcing and the Brazilian logo to it. And we believe that by combining this premium edge, this third-party space, as well as this international side to coffee, we believe that the 3-in-1 would really cater towards young New Zealand professionals.
Just to add on a little bit, I actually want to pull up a case study in Seoul City. So it's also a very popular destination for traveling. And actually, last month, I actually been to one of their flagship coffee shop called The Lockdown. You can search it up. Yeah, and they also have similar initiative like that, creating a third place for our customer. At the same time, the interesting part is they also have a small coffee shop which is connected with The Lockdown, and they have some discount initiative connected with the flag store. So actually we are attracting customers from the bar to go back to the flagship to enjoy their time and spend their money. So this is definitely something long term in terms of synergy that we can consider as well, given the time. So we would like to wrap this up a little bit. We hope with We Coffee, we can take coffee to go with Born. Thank you.
Thank you, team, for your presentation. You can find your personal belongings in the back of the room. You can also choose to watch the other presentations in the finals, but please do not return to your preparation for your classes.
First time I was in the team.
the short leave.
There might be 50% something.
I'm Richard, nice to meet you. I'm Richard, nice to meet you. Welcome to the third team's presentation for the grand final of the 2026 Champions Trophy case competition. The team presenting now is Team Kokako. On the judging panel today, we have Khorshid Terapor, the Head of Risk Analytics and Reporting at Heartland Bank, Raymond Webb, an investment analyst at Industrial Equity LLC, El D'Souza, an in-house venture capitalist at Fonterra, the owner of Art and Bloom, a previous Champions Trophy case company, and a board member of the Auckland Arts Festival. And finally, Jonathan Mason, who's had a finance career with Exxon International Paper and Fonterra, and was an independent director for Air New Zealand, Vector, and Westpac New Zealand. The team will have 10 minutes to make their presentation, followed immediately by 10 minutes of questions and answers. When you have 2 minutes remaining in your presentation, I will hold up a 2-minute sign. When you have 1 minute remaining, I will hold up the 1-minute sign. You will be cut off at exactly 10 minutes. For the audience, please remember no separate audio or visual recording of the presentation is allowed, and we ask you to kindly remain silent during the presentation. Team Kokako, you may begin when you are ready.
Desio, coffee is more than a business opportunity for you. It is part of your identity, which is why you brought us here to help address this question of how you can bring and enter and scale coffee in the New Zealand space. Good afternoon. We are Team Kokako, and today to answer this question, we're happy to present our gas strategy. But to start off, let's start by taking a look at the opportunity before you first. We see that we've measured this in both a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. But starting with the qualitative, we see that the strength of the brand of B Coffee is simply not aligned with the interest of New Zealanders. And across this, we see that there's limited brand value for Kiwis, and therefore it's just simply not feasible to scale the coffee to that degree. On the next step here, of alignment with what New Zealanders are demanding, we see that there's simply a lack of differentiation from the coffee's existing business model to be able to work and compete in the same space as existing franchises in New Zealand, and therefore there's a core misalignment on this front. And the last but not all, on the qualitative perspective, is the expansion risk. And we believe you, Desio, are simply taking on too much risk here trying to expand into New Zealand. And therefore, this excessive risk is not feasible for your aspirations. And so overall, through our qualitative criteria, it simply doesn't make sense for you to pursue this opportunity.
Now that we've established the qualitative, let's not talk numbers. We see that we are paying $100,000 in terms of franchisee fees, which we already think is overpaying for the limited brand value. Furthermore, we see a 50% net profit fee, which is 20 to 30% higher than the industry average, which we find expensive and predatory. Even if we love this brand, do we think that we could really make it work even with these financials? We made some baseline assumptions that we're happy to talk about in Q&A, but the thing that I want to really emphasize is that you're going to be net cash flow negative over the first 4 years with these excessive expansion costs and fees that you have to pay. Furthermore, as you notice, you're giving up over 50% of your profit to this company. So what we want to emphasize is that the break-even period is 5 years with this 5-store franchise model that they're asking you. You're losing $500,000 in cash flows over the first 2 years, which we think is very high risk, and we also see you're giving up half of your profit. But now we know that you love coffee, we know that you are interested in this business venture. How do we make this work for you? We think that if it isn't a coffee, there are still opportunities for you to pursue, and given our considerations, we wanted to pitch that you enter into a greenfield venture, which will allow you to have greater control, align the product better to the New Zealand market, and also get a bigger share of the profit.
Now that we've established that the greenfield is the way to go, the first and most important thing we need to do is identify which customer we have the most opportunity with, and after that determine the location, number of stores, as well as the beans logistics to make sure that we can make this a success. And we identified a few different possible customers we could target, but we want to make sure that they have the willingness to pay for a premium set of coffee, and they're also highly convertible from an existing highly developed coffee market, which is New Zealand. And the one that we identified today is a coffee drinker that is experiential and cares about that social aspect of drinking coffee. We also considered a few different cities to play with or to play, and the big 3 largest cities in New Zealand would have expensive capital expenditures to get started, and we also considered regional, but this does not make sense because it does not align with what your customer segment where they reside, so we decided to go with mid-sized. The city that I want to hone on today is Tauranga. I want to open 2 stores initially. This is so that Desio can be close to Auckland within a 2-hour drive, and we also want to select a place that has lower costs as well as the appropriate demand with your target customer residing in these areas. We also want to make sure that we have the logistics for your coffee beans right so we can have a high quality product, and we considered importing coffee, but there's a high scaling risk with the long travel time between Brazil and New Zealand. And we also considered building your own roastery, but this is there's not sufficient scale with 2 initial stores to support this, which is why I decided to import beans and partner with the local roaster to save on cost, as well as maintain that high quality coffee that you want to deliver. And we also want to hone in again why we decided not to go with the coffee, and this is because the gap in the market with the high throughput model is not ideal, as it is highly competitive in the New Zealand market, and the coffee typically imports roasted beans, which is also unsuitable given the long distance between Brazil and New Zealand, given that existing model.
Great, so now that we identified the consumer segment that you should be targeting here, we will also want to talk about your capabilities versus this consumer segment's personal preferences. We looked at price, we looked at location, convenience and speed, product quality, product innovation, as well as experience. Now we're not going to waste your time talking about things that don't really resonate. We're going to talk about the last 3 on this criteria. So take a look first at product quality and product innovation. Quality, high quality ingredients, you need your experience stuff. That is baseline, that is common sense, and you, Dacio, you already have that expertise and you have that knowledge. So let's look at product innovation. This is how you differentiate from any other coffee shop in New Zealand and wherever you decide to expand. So first, you need to leverage your Brazilian positioning. You know that culture the best. You are going to bring it to New Zealand. That is your differentiator. As well, you have a variety of drink offerings. You're targeting the experiential drinker, and they want to explore a variety of different offerings. You're going to do exactly that. And of course, having strategic store layouts that we've seen work in globally to ensure that you're able to bring this experience, make this the most optimal experience. Now, the most important thing actually I want to talk about is the cafe experience. You walk in and you're able to be immersed in a certain experience. How you're going to do that is partnering with event organizers. You'll partner with event organizers and host after-hours events. You're optimizing the space that you have already and also increasing your brand recognition amongst the Kiwis. Now let's take a look at how this would exactly work. You have your consumer. Now first, they're aware of your product. Through these event venue visits, through these events, they see that, okay, this now exists in New Zealand. I'm intrigued, I'm interested. They fall in love with your product after they try because they're through this event. And then lastly, they're converted into loyal customers because of the quality that you bring as well as the experience that you provide. Now let's hone in even more on why differentiation would not be possible if you were to expand the coffee into New Zealand. Franchisor oversight. It's as simple as that. You have no control behind how you can differentiate and how you can bring creativity to the business of what is already an incredibly competitive market that you need to be able to penetrate.
So let's look at the long-term and short-term strategy that we've established because we know that you want to think big. In the short term, we've established how you're going to set these small coffee stores in New Zealand, how we are going to oversee the supplying, the logistics, the oversight of your store, and second of all, how we're going to attract consumers and really form a point of differentiation with our awareness and consumer strategy. Going forward, as we scale, we want to enhance our partnerships to really make sure that we have this awareness and influence customers, and then continue to expand in Oceania over a period of 10 years. Now, let's talk about the impact and all that this means for you, because we know that at the end of the day, even though you care about coffee, numbers also matter. We use the same revenue assumptions for our new franchise location as we use for the coffee to make sure that we have standardized apples to apples comparison with these assumptions. Based on this, we estimated a revenue of $700,000 per store, which we think is very conservative. Now, contrary to the coffee strategy where you require very quick expansion of 5 stores in 2 years, we want to start slow. We know that over 70% of cafes fail within the first 3 years of operation, and if you divide your attention over too many competing priorities, we know that you will be next, and so we want to make sure that our attention is focused and we don't scale too quickly. With that, we see that by year 5, you're going to be able to achieve $3.5 million in revenue, as well as 5 store openings. Looking at the profitability of this strategy, the first thing that we want to emphasize again is the startup cost of $130,000, which we use consistently across our venture as well as the coffee, and these margins are also largely consistent, minus the 50% net profit that we're going to have to giving away in this franchising model. With this, we see that about $75,000 in profit per store, and that leads to $500,000 profitability by year 5. Something else that I want to highlight, with this increased profitability, what we are doing is we are halving your payback period. With the original franchising model, because you're only collecting half of the profits per store, your payback period is almost 4 years. With our model, it is less than 2, which we believe is necessary for you to keep and maintain your cash flow position. In terms of our implementation timeline, what we want to highlight is a phased approach because we know you have limited capacity and resources, and the things that you should do tomorrow is start by looking at possible areas of real estate and brainstorm unique store layout to really capture that consumer. The biggest risk that we want to highlight is a lack of interest from consumer, and with that we want to continue reevaluating our events, reevaluating our points of differentiation in menu because we know you have that human capital and competitive advantage that you can establish.
Dacio, at the end of the day, you're here to bring your identity and showcase that Brazilian identity for New Zealanders. And we truly believe that's just simply not feasible with franchising from The Coffee. But through our Greenfield gas strategy, we believe you can do just that and create a better taste for New Zealanders. Thank you, and we'd love to open the floor to questions at this time.
We've seen with some of the challenges that Starbucks has had that it takes a lot of expertise to design the kitchen correctly so the stuff aren't walking too far. Does Decio have the expertise to work out what equipment to buy and design the kitchen and all the rest of it?
Yeah, for sure. So we definitely consider that. We know, Decio, your expertise lie in private equity and also in coffee taste. And we know that with that, you don't necessarily have all the expertise to start and run a coffee shop on your own. This is where we think the partnerships come in very crucially. So we want to highlight 2 different kinds of partnerships. The first is the event partnerships that you have, where you can partner with local businesses, get their advice, get expertise. But the second thing that we want to highlight is having a partner, taking on a human capital partner on board in your business venture to open these stores with. With that, we believe that it is going to be easier for you to scale and have those expertise without having to sacrifice so much of your property and ownership. And with that, I'll pass it off to Richard to add on.
We also want to highlight that we are targeting consumers that care about the experiential, and we are not competing in the space of the fast-moving, on-the-go coffee, because we know that other players like Starbucks can't compete on scale, and those minor differences in, say, the throughput rate of coffee aren't really important there. But in this case, we believe experience and your background are the most tailored for this recommendation.
Okay, I'll just do it that way. I understand why you're saying start up in Tauranga, smaller place. If Decio were to challenge you and just say, I live in Auckland, and every time you want me to go to these 2 new stores, it's a 6-hour time commitment just to get there, would you bend and say, look, we can pivot our proposal to Auckland being the first 2 stores? Or would you say, you're making a terrible mistake, try the 6 hours? 3 hours there, 3 hours back. It's about the same on the plane.
Sure. So the only cities that we considered for this initial phase of expansion were ones within 2 hours within Auckland, but we would consider doing the outer boroughs of, say, Auckland to have as that target consumer and at the same time minimize the costs to us for starting these 2 new stores.
Yeah.
But in the appendix, we have a phase expansion. All these are within 2 hours because we understand that given international business travel, you probably would want to be nearby Auckland,
Yeah.
and that's why we chose that, considering both cost as well as our ability to meet our targeted consumer here.
Yeah, and by the way, just to be clear, I wasn't really talking about the economics. I was talking about the entrepreneur's preference, that he might just say, I live in Auckland, I don't want to go to, I don't want, my 2 new stores, per Raymond's, observation, you really want to be sure those work right. I just want to collapse the commute to make it easier for me to kick the tire. That's what I was saying, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I can start with opening with a case study of a very similar cafe that we know, which is called Little Pisces.
Yeah.
This is a cafe that operates out of North America, and we know that the main franchisees are located in Toronto versus the owner of these expansion startups is located in LA. And so first of all, we believe that the founder does not need to be present at these cafes 24/7 once they have an established staff, established experience, and they can commute there every couple of weeks for regular checkups, for everything else, to make sure big changes are operating smoothly, but we do not see that their presence is necessary there 24/7. So we believe that we are able to have this flexible model based on case studies that we have.
Thank you.
Can you take me through the baseline assumptions that you said you had in your appendix on why we're saying no?
Yeah, for sure. So happy to walk through that. I'm going to pull up starting with the coffee forecast income that we looked at. So here we forecasted store count over the years, with the first 2 years being given to us in the case, and we also looked at the revenue sensitivity. So we were able to estimate an $8 basket size based on the pricing that was given for an average coffee order in the appendix. With that and our personal research and experience on this industry, we were also able to estimate 30 sales per hour as a very kind of bullish and reasonable estimate in terms of this revenue. So from these assumptions, we were able to reach the $700,000 revenue, which we also sensitized some base and bear case scenarios. With this revenue, we multiplied it just by the number of stores, and then looked at the cost estimates and margins partially given to us in the appendix, but also made some of our own estimates based on these numbers, which are highlighted later here for the startup costs. So we wanted to break it down very thoroughly. We wanted to make sure that our financials are reasonable and sound. Going down, kind of subtracting our costs based on the estimates that were given to us and the estimates that we broke down and made ourselves. We applied a 30% tax rate and then a 50% net income franchising fee rate as well, which
Thank you. I just want to follow up question. I'll stop you there. So if a competitor takes the master franchise agreement and succeeds, how will Desio justify the missed opportunity to Norbury partner board?
Yeah, for sure. So that's a great question. Obviously, with the right kind of team, with the right expertise, it is very possible for the coffee to succeed. We can't give you a 100% guarantee that this is not a viable business model because we know that it's worked internationally. But what we see is that this is a model that you are going to be constantly battling uphill kind of battles with, that it is not aligned to the demands of the New Zealand consumer, that it is going to be very expensive and unprofitable for you to operate. And so even though it's possible to be successful, even though it's possible potentially to achieve the scale, if everything goes in your favor, we see fundamentally the price that you are paying financially is just not worth it for this franchise. And furthermore, we see greater opportunities opening our own franchise to have greater control over this differentiation.
Thank you.
Thank you, team. I have a question regarding Appendix 1, the rear cafe income, just the one before that. I'm looking at your rent assumption line, and it's for New Zealand's quite high in rent costs. Do you think it's reasonable to say that you've basically got $24,000 in rent, that's $2K a month, and essentially, if you look at the case on page 18, they've literally given you a rent, low range and high range, and if you take the high range of that rent, you're basically cash flow negative the whole 5 years.
For sure. So happy to answer that question. I think a few things that we want to clarify with the financials here. First of all, with the rent assumptions, we've made this lower in the Rio Coffee estimate just because we are operating, again, not out of Auckland, which is what the information in the case provides, and so we estimate the rent there is going to be significantly lower. If we see that the rent is higher again, we are able to reevaluate potentially some of our locations and our establishments, but we also want to emphasize that this is consistently kind of lower across both of these incomes. We didn't have availability to research and we didn't want to fully rely on the estimates of ChatGPT. And so we made these conservative assumptions. We are able to reevaluate our locations, and we want to emphasize that even with our greenfield expansion, the rent is going to be significantly lower. Even if both of the assumptions are a little bit off, we are still directionally correct in terms of our quantification.
Did you consider negotiating on the terms of the master franchise agreement and what would need to change in order to say yes?
Yeah, so we definitely considered that, but one of the things that we thought was pivotal was the bargaining power that Desio has as a inexperienced incumbent in the industry and against a franchisor model that is already well expanded in Brazil and through other parts of the world. We think that there's very little negotiating power available here for Desio to try to leverage the position to try to have better terms, and especially in an industry that's as essentially as competitive as New Zealand is. We think that that's even more difficult for him to really try to get a position and a foothold in the industry when he doesn't really have the experience yet of expanding the entire model. So that's why we think the cost and the burden for him in trying to negotiate just isn't worth the time and the pressure that would be put on him, but rather you should try to focus on efforts of how he can actually bring his love, his experience, and his knowledge of coffee by himself and through his associates existing in the market into the New Zealand market.
Given that Tauranga has a population of 161,000 people, what are the advantages and disadvantages of choosing to start in Tauranga?
Sure. So in the case briefing, Tauranga was mentioned to have a highly affluent population, which is in line with our target consumer that is looking to experiment, looking to try new things, and is also convertible from other coffee chains. We believe that given that Auckland is a very cosmopolitan city, central business district of New Zealand is there, the on-the-go consumer that the coffee would have is not a viable option, and we believe that while the population is a bit on the smaller end, it is a highly affluent, wealthy population that would have that targeted consumer that we are seeking.
Thank you.
One of the things I really liked is the after hours, but does that mean in the evening or could it be in the morning? People are busy in the morning.
Yeah, of course. So it could be in the morning or in the afternoon, so after you've closed your current operating hours. This is really up to the consumer segment that you are going to continuously evaluate as your business opens for operations. And so by evaluating both your partners, the partners that you partner with for the events, as well as the consumers that you currently have, you're going to be able to understand if they would prefer events in the morning or after hours, like quite literally in the evenings.
And so what I was following up then is after hours events, coffee doesn't always fit with like 7 p.m. as an example, like, right? Did you think through, it's a really small part of your proposal.
Yes, I would love to double
Thank you.
down.
Sorry, thank you team for your presentation. That is 10 minutes. You can find your personal belongings in the back of the room. You're welcome to watch the other finalists present after you, but please do not return upstairs to your preparation room. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay. Oh, really? That was yeah.
Dylan, nice to meet you.
Shannon, nice to meet you.
Dylan, nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming. Shannon, nice to meet you. Hi, Shannon, how's your hair? Hi, Kausha, nice to meet you.
Welcome to the fourth team's presentation for the grand final of the 2026 Champions Trophy case competition. The team presenting now is Team Kiwi. On the judging panel today, we have Khorshid Tarapour, the Head of Risk Analytics and Reporting at Heartland Bank, Raymond Webb, an Investment Analyst at Industrial Equity LLC, El D'Souza, who works as an in-house venture capitalist at Fonterra, is the owner of Art and Bloom, a previous Champions Trophy case company, and is on the board of the Auckland Arts Festival. And finally, Jonathan Mason, who has had a finance career with Exxon International Paper and Fonterra, and was an independent director for Air New Zealand, Vector, and Westpac New Zealand. The team will have 10 minutes to make their presentation, followed immediately by 10 minutes of questions and answers. When you have 2 minutes remaining in your presentation, I will hold up a 2-minute sign. When you have 1 minute remaining, I will hold up a 1-minute sign, and you will be cut off at 10 minutes. For the audience, please remain silent during the presentations, and there's no additional audio or video recording of the presentation allowed. Team Kiwi, you may begin when you are ready.
During my recent summer internship, my manager used to always scold me for getting back to my desk late. And that is when I started opting for grab-and-go coffee. But as I sat at my desk, I always wondered to myself, does grab-and-go coffee always have to taste so cheap?
And as for me, I hate waking up 30 minutes earlier just to wait for my cup of artisanal coffee to be made.
But today, we found out about the coffee, a brand that aims to marry both premium coffee and convenience. Here on our panel, we are Team Kiwi, consisting of me, Dylan, Shannon, QX, and Claire.
So, when we evaluate the 3 things that Dell Coffee must prioritize, we see that it has now to juggle brand identity, upfront capital, as well as pleasing the New Zealand consumer preference. This leads us to our first key issue, or should we secure master franchise rights for New Zealand? And if so, what is the entry plan for the next 24 months?
So over here, we also determined that Desio should consider 3 key criteria, specifically that of the revenue opportunity from acquiring the master franchise rights. Secondly, the product market fit in terms of how the coffee fits with the New Zealand consumers. And lastly, the unit economics in terms of cost. And with that, we actually determined that we should secure the master franchise rights. Next, Desio must prioritize which regions to actually go into for the first 5 company-owned stores. So here, we've actually evaluated the regions based on size, growth, and ability to win. And ultimately, we decided that Auckland would be the way to go, followed by Wellington.
Then this leads us to our second key issue of what format should the first 5 company-owned stores use.
And here, we've developed a 2-layer funnel framework where we essentially first break down the segments, followed by the micro locations.
As for the segments, we see that we are currently playing in the quick and grab-and-go segment, but we're trying to balance that with the premium branding as well. As such, Dell Coffee should play in grab-and-go with the potential to stand out with its quality offerings.
The next layer of the funnel is that of the micro location one, where essentially we've weighted across 3 different categories: CBD, suburban high streets, and also airports. And ultimately, with the criteria listed as above, we determined that CBD is actually the region for the coffee to focus on.
And this leads us to our third key issue of what operating and supply choices are most critical for growing the coffee.
And as for the operating side of things, we actually determined that there are 3 different choices. And hence, here is why we need to prioritize throughput design, training pipeline, and simple practical technology.
And why we've chosen to prioritize this is because these elements are the foundational elements to running a store. Whereas for manual discipline, it may not be as applicable for CBD workers who tend to have the same coffee orders a day. And for the quality system that scales, it requires the aforementioned elements to be fulfilled before we can finally delve into improving that operationally.
And next, we consider the supply chain as well, where we determined that essentially weighing the cost, scalability, and other factors as listed above, the way that the coffee should actually approach this should be first to establish partnerships with the roaster, and in order to ensure the brand longevity, they could then pivot into actually manufacturing their own coffee roasteries.
And now diving into a comprehensive 24-month timeline. So you've given us a huge ask, and we'll be delivering a huge strategy. Essentially, we've laid out a geographical expansion between Auckland and Wellington across a 24-month period, looking at both the front end, which is what the consumer sees, as well as the back end, which is what we have to do.
And so with that in mind, Claire and I are extremely excited to bring you through the front-end preparations for today through a 3-pronged strategy starting from month 1 to 6, where we establish a flagship store in Auckland, month 6 to 12, where we establish a coffee window as well as a micro kiosk in Auckland, and finally, month 12 to 14, where we expand into Wellington. Now let us take you through months 1 to 6, our flagship store launch. There are 3 key things I would like to bring your attention to in our flagship store. Firstly, we want the centerpiece of this store to be a bonsai tree, the centerpiece of the store. We believe that this hits the target of Japanese minimalization as well as the simple, calm and clean brand identity. The second thing that we would like to introduce to you is a bean smelling experience. Essentially what it is a circular table surrounding the bonsai tree, which is our centerpiece, sharing with you how our coffee beans are being brewed, as well as letting you be able to smell the coffee beans for yourself when you're actually in store. What this does is that it hits the high expectations of coffee drinkers in New Zealand. Finally, we would like to have our kiosk and order within the store, including an in-app ordering system. What this does is that it establishes a modern and fast ordering concept for the entire store.
If you're wondering why we must have a flagship store, there are 3 key reasons for that. It's experimental, memorable, and it allows for localization. And last but not least, we can even use it as a training hub.
As for the next 6 to 12 months, we want to establish a coffee window as well as a micro kiosk as an experimental ground. The criteria for choosing the location will be a high percentage of office workers, high footfall, as well as high disposable income.
And if you're wondering why we need to have 2 different stores, it's because we have limited information about the consumption habits of Kiwis, and therefore want to use this as a test ground to see what kind of format we can actually replicate in the long run. Now, this will allow us to determine the most optimal store type.
Moving on to the next 12 to 24 months, this shows the expansion that we have to Wellington. Now we see that we have already touched Auckland, and therefore Wellington is our next target. We hope to launch 1 flagship store similar to the one that we have in Auckland, as well as 1 coffee window or micro kiosk, depending on the data that we've collected in the past 6 months.
And all while expanding, we must keep in mind quality assurance, training consistency, as well as a resilient supply chain.
And now, in terms of marketing, we want to launch the Simple is In campaign. This means that we are able to give our consumers free samples for customers either wearing a plain white or beige outfit. What this does is, what they have to do is to post on social media and tag our Instagram and download the coffee application.
There are also other channels we can use: social media, search engine optimization, or even collaborating with local food bloggers. And now, since we've covered the front end, let's dive into the back end. There are 4 key things that we need to prepare. First is testing a store format to find the ideal type. Next, we'll be diving into store operations to learn how to optimize store performance. Next, supply chain, by ensuring we have a smooth and reliable one. And last but not least, franchisee operations. So firstly, we need to determine whether the windows or the kiosks are actually the ideal store type. Now, how we will choose is following this sequence. We're going to collect data, for example, sales, output of coffee per hour, amongst others. Compare that with the cost that we've accumulated for each store type so far.
Now, something that you have to note is that if all the sales types are equal across 2 different types of stores, we'll just choose the one with the lower capex option.
And moving on for store operations, we believe that the ordering process as well as the training pipeline is absolutely critical. The reason why ordering process is so important is because we are trying to generate a higher throughput. Therefore, we will have iPads in store where customers can order, as well as allow them to use the app. For the training pipeline, we'll use the trainer format, as well as training the various employees in all the stores in the CBD region.
Some other considerations that we have include staffing patterns, quality checks, workflows, as well as stock management.
And moving on, we have the supply chain. So we've identified that we are going for the second option with regards to roasting. However, we also acknowledge the fact that it's important for us to have our own roasting system, and therefore we will stagger the rollout such that we're able to become independent eventually.
Moving on.
And last but not least, we will have a franchisee playbook where we have the 4 following criteria, which will allow for increased standardization of onboarding and selection, as well as an increased rate of location openings.
And now moving on to our financials. So a key question was that how we're going to fix risk number 2, which is the forex exposure. And while we can't control macro outputs, what we can control is to have sufficient buffer in our annual budget and costs.
And next, we actually see the profit table that will be profitable by the end of 2027. As you can see, this is the cash inflow diagram, where most of it is generated from the increase in the number of stores.
As you can see, the cost for the first year will be very heavy, but this is mostly upfront fixed costs, and for the subsequent years, it will decrease as they are all variable operating expenses.
Next, we also see that by 2030, these are some non-financial metrics that we have actually hit, including more than 5 companies, including 5 stores actually company-owned, and 22 stores from that of franchisees.
And these stores will have positive unit economics and will be able to serve 100,000 New Zealanders annually per store.
And so with our strategies, we actually see that New Zealanders no longer have to face the problem that I did during my summer internship, where I had to grab and go a drink that often tasted quite cheap.
And now not only can they not worry about work, but they can also wake up a little later every single day. Thank you.
Hi team, thank you so much for your presentation. Your strategy is grab and go coffee. Do you think this aligns with a big flagship store, and do you think starting off with something so high capital intensive is the best place to go with this?
Yeah, of course we understand, normally you wouldn't use a flagship store alongside like a window and kiosk, but while the coffee wants to have grab and go, they also want to maintain this premium appearance. And from all the coffee chains that we've ever seen in many countries, it is normally consistent where you would try to have a very impressive store to kind of give off that premium appearance. So therefore we decided that both formats would be appropriate.
And sorry, just with the flagship store, franchising models usually have a very, very strict appearance thing. Although I love the idea of the tree and the beans, do you think it sticks to the franchise agreement?
So to clarify, for the flagship stores, it will be fully company-owned, whereas for franchisees, they only are able to run either the mobile kiosk or the company coffee counters.
You talk about the quality of the coffee, the quality and how you're planning on standing out based on the quality. However, in New Zealand, every coffee that's available is known for its high quality. It's just a market of high quality coffee. So how will you stand out and differentiate the quality of this coffee?
Yeah, perhaps I can take this question. I mean, that's exactly why we decided to have this kind of a concept of a flagship store. We know that all New Zealanders are used to having high quality coffee, but what they're curious about the types of coffee that we have to offer. That's why we have different kind of beans that are being displayed in our flagship store, where they can actually touch the beans in real life and take a smell, and enabling them to choose whichever beans is most appropriate for their taste.
I know it was really well explained, your expansion process. I'd like to give you 2 scenarios. You start in Auckland and you go to Wellington. Wellington is like an 8-hour drive from Auckland. If Auckland's doing extremely well, the financials of expanding within Auckland after 12 months would actually be more compelling. Or I'll do the other bookend. If Auckland is doing extremely poorly, then starting a new store 8 hours away, you might not want to do that either. Did you think, you talked about optionality in other parts of your presentation. Did you think about optionality on your expansion plan?
Sure, yeah, perhaps I could take this question. Yes, we did indeed think of optionality for our expansion plans. I just want to clarify that the reason why we chose Auckland and Wellington is primarily due to the high disposable income of these 2 particular cities. So definitely we will prioritize that of Auckland as mentioned, and in the bad case that perhaps it doesn't work, we saw that the disposable income would roughly be similar for Wellington and Auckland, thus that would be the other option as well.
In addition to the timeline, we can also have different evaluation points that are kind of like stop or go to determine if you should continue in Auckland, completely relook at your strategy.
Well, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
So the coffee as a name is rather generic. Why should we pay 100k USD and ongoing royalty costs for the coffee?
Yeah, of course. I think the coffee is a generic name, but I will say having a generic name doesn't necessarily mean that that's all that people look at, because you have the experience, you have the product, and with regards to the experience, you have the flagship store that we would suggest, and the model of that is actually replicated quite closely to what you see in South Korea, where the more beautiful a store is, the more people want to go there. So we feel like that is quite an important part of the coffee beyond just the name.
No, you go.
Okay, sure. A quick question. So, New Zealand's really struggling with hospitality at the moment, number one in limitations. How do you know when we should stop with your strategy if it just doesn't work out, and what would your plan be if your strategy doesn't work?
Yeah, so according to our implementation timeline, we'll be rolling out the first flagship store and the subsequent two test stores for the mobile kiosk as well as the concept, the coffee window in the first. And if that doesn't work out, we can then scale back, because these mobile kiosks or coffee windows don't require that high of a capex investment to run, and so that we'll evaluate and see if we want to proceed or withdraw.
So what's on the menu? How is it different to the coffee stores globally? How is it different to coffee stores in Auckland, other coffee stores in Auckland and Wellington?
Yeah, so based on the coffee menu alone, there's not much differences, as we all offer flat white coffees. But what we offer is a high quality, convenient option, and how we can ensure that it remains affordable, being high quality and convenient, is through streamlining our menu. And so, for example, in areas like the CBD area, we won't have extensive menus like matcha cloud lattes or things that people would usually drink leisurely, but we focus on what office workers usually drink, like espressos or like flat white coffees.
So Auckland has 9 times the population of Wellington, and in Wellington, in this central business district on the weekend, if you fire a cannon, you won't have anybody. Why wouldn't we have a second flagship store in Auckland and leave Wellington for the future?
We could consider a second flagship store in Auckland. However, when we look at the type of coffee we sell, we're trying to have a grab-and-go experience. And a flagship store is where people can sit down, take their time, and really enjoy their coffee. So we felt like having one flagship store in Auckland should be enough to cater to that demographic, and it might potentially be a waste of resources to open up another.
Thank you.
900k in year one is quite a big upfront cost. If it fails, if we decide not to proceed, how much of that can we claw back?
Yeah, so we go to this slide, please. Yeah, so if we can claw, if we see that it's not working out, but we have we sign brand contracts that usually sign 12 months in advance, and so we'll go ahead with our year 2 operations, but we'll probably cut back on the OPEX costs. So what that means is that we can continue our operations for year 2, and we can essentially recoup like at least 600k of upfront costs that we put up, which is around 2/3 of year 0.
Thank you. Why can't I do this on my own name, and why should I franchise? What is the whole point of franchising in this model?
Yeah, so I think the key point to franchising is because the coffee is a very well-known brand in the Brazil market. And for the New Zealand market that cares a lot about the high-quality coffee beans, we need to kind of retain that brand kind of identity and reputation when we try to launch a new brand versus starting one that may be homegrown, but may not share the same kind of reputation and brand awareness as that of the coffee.
Sorry, so you said Brazil was one of the main buying points. Why can't I just import beans from Brazil? Why do I need the coffee to get me there?
Yeah, so I think in the case it mentioned that while we could potentially import beans from Brazil, there may be hiccups in terms of logistics or the freshness of the beans itself. And so if we were to import it from Brazil, not only will we be unable to kind of ensure that the beans remain fresh in terms of weather and logistics disruptions, but if there's any other hiccups in terms of the operational of how we're going to get the raw materials and stuff, we can't effectively counter that in time as well, versus having a roastery that's situated nearby us in New Zealand.
At what point in your development plan would you decide that let's say it doesn't work? How would you make the decision to can it, and at what point would you do that?
Sorry, but when you say can it, do you mean like throw it out?
Shut down.
Shut it down. According to our implementation timeline, after we have launched the marketing campaign as well as the test ground, I believe we'll get some sort of an indication based on sales. We could also potentially look at neighboring coffee shop sales to determine if it's worth even continue pursuing it. But I think before you decide if you need to can it, you need to evaluate all the different reasons that your store may not be performing. Perhaps give it a second shot, maybe change up the menu, do extra marketing, and if you are unable to maintain the cost, then shutting it down might be the best option.
So, being venture capital, the main thing I'm interested is what's the return on investment, what type of percentage returns can I expect on this? Could you talk me through whether this is going to be worth the risk?
Yeah, so if you go to appendix like maybe 33 and 34, we talk about the unit economics per store. And you can see for both the flagship store and the non-flagship store, we project a break even at around 2027 or post first year after the strategy has been launched. Yeah, and this will be driven mainly by selling more coffees during peak hours, non-peak hours, and during the weekends as well.
Awesome, thank you for that, team. I just had sorry, I just lost my question.
That's all right. It's about
yeah,
10 minutes. So
sorry.
I'll leave it there. Thank you for your presentation, team.
I'm not surprised.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, team. You can find your personal belongings in the back of the room. You're welcome to watch the other finalists present, but you are not allowed to return to your preparation room upstairs. next team will come in shortly.
Nick, nice to meet you. No, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. No, nice to meet you. Colin.
Welcome to the fifth team's presentation for the grand final of the 2026 Champions Trophy Case Competition. The team presenting now is Team Piwaka Waka. On the judging panel today, we have Khorshid Terapor, Head of Risk Analytics and Reporting at Heartland Bank, Raymond Webb, an investment analyst at Industrial Equity LLC, El D'Souza, an in-house venture capitalist at Fonterra, the owner of Art and Bloom, a previous Champions Trophy case company, and a board member of the Auckland Arts Festival, and finally, Jonathan Mason, who has had a finance career with Exxon International Paper and Fonterra, and was an independent director for Air New Zealand, Vector, and Westpac New Zealand. The team will have 10 minutes to make their presentation, followed immediately by 10 minutes of question and answer. When you have 2 minutes remaining in your presentation, I will hold up a 2-minute sign. When you have 1 minute remaining, I will hold up a 1-minute sign. You will be cut off at 10 minutes. For the audience, please remember to remain silent during the presentation, and no additional audio or visual recording of the presentation is allowed. Team Piwaka Waka, you may begin when you're ready.
Growing up, I thought coffee was magic. Every morning, somehow it had the ability to turn my parents from cranky, mad individuals into the most nice and wholesome people you've ever met. Today, coffee still has the same magic to connect people through community, quality, and convenience. And today, Desio and the coffee have the opportunity to bring this same magic to Auckland. Good afternoon. My name is Nicholas, and today I'm joined by my colleagues Noah, Colin, and Emily, and we make up Team Piwaka Waka. Today you came to us with an overarching question of should Desio master franchise in New Zealand? And we believe he should through a 3-step plan of understanding how they should position, how they can enter the market, and how they can execute. And you can do so through a tailored strategy focused on acquiring young professionals in New Zealand as your target customer. Now before we jump into our solution, let's understand how we got there. In our analysis, we looked at the coffee's strengths and found that premium, convenient quality, speed-led service were at the front of what they offer. When looking at New Zealand preferences, which also included convenience and quality, we saw strong alignment between the two groups. And then when looking at the competitive landscape in New Zealand, we found that the coffee has an opportunity to stand out when it comes to premium and convenient experiences. Thus, the coffee is a premium but convenient brand, providing repeatable, high-quality service and drinks, and this should be the foundation of the brand's positioning in New Zealand. Now we know what the brand looks like, let's understand who the target customer of the coffee is. We looked at multiple groups here and found that professionals as well as social customers stand out as a target customer which most aligns with what the coffee is looking for. This is why we should meet our target customer, Ivan. He's a young professional who likes to grab coffee on the go on his way to work, and he's also someone who likes to drink socially as an activity. Now that we met Ivan, let's understand how we're going to attract him through a 5-component strategy. First, identifying specific locations in New Zealand, building out revamped store designs, revamping the product to be tailored to the New Zealand market, creating marketing, and organizing logistics to ensure you can execute in New Zealand. And we will be able to create a strategy that minimizes risks, as well as creates proof of concept for future franchisees. Now I'll hand it off to Noah to talk a little bit more about locations.
Thanks, Nick. So now that we've met Ivan and we know how to target him, we want to make sure we can reach him. And we broke this down into 3 distinct layers. First is city, next is neighborhood, and finally is the site selection. When looking at the city, we're focusing on high density areas with significant business activity in affluent urban areas. We have rank ordered the major cities in the North Island, and we want you to first enter in Auckland, then Wellington, and Hamilton to form that golden triangle. We believe the travel between the 3 will further enhance your growth strategy. When it comes to neighborhood, we're looking at dense CBDs, areas where young professionals both live and work. An example would be Commercial Bay. When we're looking at the sites, we're looking at areas with high foot traffic, areas on the street level so it's super visible, and areas with low traffic so we can still encourage that social element. And we recommend across the PwC Tower as an example. And we believe with this strategy, we can both find Ivan and provide him the service that he's looking for in the places he's going to be. But now that we've understood where you're going to place it, we need to understand what the stores are going to look like.
We took a look at your current store layout as shown up here. We've identified 3 main problems with it. It's congested, there's no flow, and the seating space interferes with the actual customer experience. As such, we want to revamp your store to look a little bit like the proposed layout up here. We have 3 main layouts: the flagship store, a more compact version so that you can utilize your strength when it comes to revamping compact spaces, as well as a more pop-up center store for really small areas. And through these layouts, we want to have 5 main things. The first is easy order access. The second is going to be a window with a kiosk so that customers who want to pay and go can do so right away. We want to have in-store ordering as well. We want to also have back of cafe seating to attract both the social customers as well. And finally, we want to ensure that the stores are compact. But really what's most important through what we're trying to offer you through these new revamped layouts is that they're able to attract customers to the grab-and-go sector as well as more social. But now that we have these store layouts, how can we ensure that the products the coffee provides matches what Ivan wants?
In New Zealand, there are 3 core staples, and we want to ensure you can provide that right away. We understand that 50% of current transactions approximately still are flat white. And so we believe that getting these 3 or 4 products correct is the first thing to do. Ensuring that your logistic chains as well as the actual recipes are perfecting it so customers like Ivan are satisfied. But then we want to make sure that you're able to differentiate yourself. Premium doesn't have to mean simple, it can mean luxurious flavors. And that's why we recommend, once you've had a foothold in Auckland, and as you expand into Wellington, you should look at lavender lattes, orange espresso tonics, and other fun drinks to pull in an additional customer base. Now, part of your product isn't just the drink you serve, it's what you sell to the customer with packaging and the message that provides. We think you have a great strength with this minimalism. We want to double down on how you can create buzz within the New Zealand audience. That's why we recommend creating Auckland edition or New Zealand edition specific mugs. We believe that will create buzz on your launch and show people when they're putting their coffee on their desk next to their workmate that this is something that I want to buy. It's a great customer acquisition engine. But that's not all. We also want to make sure that we launch into the market with a bang.
There are 2 main goals we have when it comes to the market. The first is building that brand awareness, and the second is driving that foot traffic into your in-person locations. We're doing so through 2 main outlets, online and offline, with 5 key main marketing strategies. That is going to include influencer partnerships, social media ads, the social media challenge, a flagship launch event for your in-person flagship store, and finally, in-person samples. But really when it comes to marketing, we want to achieve 3 main things, and we want to really emphasize those same 3 main things. The first is the consistency of your recognizable but minimalist brand. We want that to be everywhere, in the cups that you make, in the ads you put out, and influencers you partner with. The second is going to be really emphasizing that relationship building. We want to ensure that customers feel and have that service level when they come to you to buy that coffee. And thirdly, we want to communicate that premium, convenient, respectable service brand. But how do we ensure that the backbone of the operations are in place?
When looking at your logistics, we considered 3 different strategies, and we've highlighted 2 of them: sourcing, warehousing, and training. And I'm happy to talk about training in the Q&A. When looking at sourcing, we recommend sourcing locally for 3 key reasons. First, it's a faster time to market. Second, it builds credibility with the local market. And 3, it's the it's the lightest in terms of assets. And we are confident that you can work with local partners to still create a similar flavor profile as your global brand. Now, when partnering with these local roasters, we want you to focus on having around 3 to 4 partners. We want a high enough number so that if one goes out of business, you're still able to meet the customer demand. But we want to ensure that it's not too large so you can really control that flavor. The next thing to do is establish taste and quality standards with these partners. You cannot let these partners give you bad beans, because that will cripple your brand credibility. And lastly, setting delivery expectations. You're a high-flow store with not a lot of space, so you need constant throughput. And making sure that your suppliers are able to meet that demand is critical. And a part of meeting this demand comes to our warehousing strategy. We believe that with this local partnership, you still need control over that supply chain, that last mile to your stores. And that's why we recommend a hub model warehousing strategy, where you have a single hub per island or per roughly geographical condition. Right now, we believe your first warehouse should be just outside of Auckland due to the retail pricing. But essentially, this will serve as the staging area to deploy across your stores. So the second your store needs a refill of cups, beans, or whatever, you'll be able to deliver it within the next day. But now that you understand how exactly the strategy will come together and you will succeed in Auckland, let's look at the timing.
There are 3 key phases to our timeline: the setup phase, the testing phase, and the scaling phase. But the most important thing about this 24-month timeline is that after each phase, we want to ensure you're doing rigorous risk management testing to ensure that you're still able to pursue the franchisement without disrupting your actual core business or your investment. I'd like to pass off to Emily now to talk more about the impacts.
Thanks so much, Colin. Let's first talk about some financial and risk KPIs. This strategy will generate around a 1.13x ROI, which translates to about $2.4 million of pure profit over the course of 5 years. We also know that you care a lot about risk mitigation, so we gave you some benchmarks as well, including a 20+ Net Promoter score per store, a 25% store margin, as well as 350 average daily customers per store. Now, what does this look like from a macro financial perspective? In terms of revenue, this strategy will generate $4 million by year 5 through the strategic rollout of our company stores and franchisees. Now, when it comes to launching this strategy, it'll cost about $800,000 in the first year and break even in about 2.5 years. We believe that this is very feasible and in line with general cafe metrics. Now, with our 5-pronged strategy, we will finally be able to help Desio fulfill his dream of expanding the coffee into New Zealand. Thank you, and we are now open to questions.
Thank you for your presentation. New Zealand, especially the competitors in slide, I think it was 3, almost all of them run a hybrid model of coffee and food, and that's kind of what keeps them going. How do you justify only running a coffee model in New Zealand?
Yeah, definitely. For our current strategic situation, we did primarily focus on the coffee element due to the nature of our customers. They're grab and go. We do think later down the line you can run a maybe snack side of it. We're thinking croissants and muffins, but we believe the core brand identity lies in the coffee and the drinks, and you should start there. That does not necessarily discount further expansion to it. That was kind of our part of our core considerations.
When we look at the costs for the coffee, so it's the coffee brand itself is rather generic, and we're paying USD 100K for that. What justifies that upfront cost and the ongoing royalty costs?
We believe that there's twofold. One is the brand, and then I'll talk about the operations that the coffee can provide in terms of marketing. But we believe the coffee brand, the minimal aesthetic it's created, as well as the kind of store aesthetic it's created across Latin America and North America, will be able to show the New Zealand audience that this coffee comes not just from the domestic, obviously the beans will, but it's a local kind of international infusion of the two. We also believe that being the master franchise and connecting into the marketing network of the coffee will greatly help the launch. That's kind of a big part of our strategy, and what's helping to fund that marketing is their extensive marketing network, so we don't have to hire anyone on the ground.
And pass on to you.
With your packaging, are you only intending to have one size?
We are intending to have around 2 sizes. We know typically there's 3 sizes, but we believe due to the small store format, the 2 sizes is optimal, and we don't believe there's too much of a strategic advantage in doing the medium type of pricing where you push towards a large. We believe having a small option, large option, it keeps it simple for our customers, it keeps it simple for us.
Thank
you. I noticed you're on the sourcing locally for sort of risk management and maybe sort of bargaining power too. That you're 3 to 4 local roasters. The question is, you did in your talk say that you really focus on premium. So let's say they're all premium roasters. Though you can have different tasting coffee that's all premium. And so brand consistency, you know, if we think about McDonald's, it's not even that great, but we go there because we know what it's gonna be. How do you manage against having premium coffee that's different because it's the different roasters?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the first things that I want to point out, and what Noah mentioned sort of is product side, is that we're going to have different types of coffees. And so I understand that the sort of, roasting produces really small differences between different customers, but we also want to leverage that to help out with the type of coffees we produce. So one roaster will have coffee, another roaster will have another type of coffee. So that's sort of one way we sort of start with the risk mitigation of ensuring that the sort of types of coffee we sell are consistent. Now, ensuring that the coffee is consistent sort of across the board, across the regions, we really want to emphasize that we're planning on creating risk management policies in place. So I have sort of a playbook that we're generating to ensure that the people we partner with have quality control, we have quality assistance, to ensure that everything they produce, from the beans, the actual roasting part, all match a stable metric that the coffee requires for them.
What are the go, no-go decision points along the way to decide at what point do we pull the plug versus continue on?
Yeah, so in terms of, so these are kind of the store metrics themselves. This is, should we expand further in the region? So let's say we open the Auckland store, the flagship store, and we can't reach 250 customers a day. That's an immediate pull. We won't further expand there. Maybe we look at Wellington or maybe Hamilton with its college population and redistrict there. In terms of the supplier base, before you decide to actually launch the whole brand and pay that fee, we believe that you should be testing the quality and the taste profile of the suppliers. And if you can't reach that 3 to 4 goal, that's another pull point. Additionally, with the kind of store formatting, if you cannot find a site that promotes this flow concept where you have, if you could show the flow concept, where you can both order at the window but also sit down, we believe you should try to find another dense location because that's another critical point. So those kind of are 3 stages throughout the process, throughout the 5-pronged strategy that we think is critical to get right. The others can be flexible.
Thank you. I'm looking at your location and your store's slides, and in both cases, you've chosen quite expensive and highly costly things like, high density population. Auckland's quite expensive for rents. And then on top of that, you've chosen 3 different layouts that could be done, which is really expensive to kit out as well. Do you think you're going to be heavily costed and not making too much profit out of that?
Yeah, I think so. The logic behind the costly rent areas is that our strategic value is we can operate small, really high throughput. So we believe we can get the most dollars at a least amount of space. So that's that part. But in terms of the number of store layouts, we believe you should prioritize one, the flagship, and then the compact, and the pop-ups are a nice to have. So let's say the pop-ups, that's the last stage of growth. So if you can't cost out pop-ups, we believe you can remove that. But the compact itself is quite similar to the flagship. So all the planning for furniture and the purchasing of that is exactly the same. And so the only difference is essentially the arrangement that you would make for costing this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and sorry, did the team consider locations like the airport or public transport hubs where basically customers in and out, so you don't need sort of seating?
Yeah, so of course we considered that. Mainly for the airport specifically, we noticed that in the cases that it was really, really expensive, sort of like CBD. More importantly, that it targeted mainly tourists. We We wanted to focus on the young professionals. We felt that the airport is not the right location to do so. And more on the travel hubs, we felt that we wanted to focus more on these sort of high traffic locations that had constant in and out, not just with young professionals commuting to work, but also people who are experiencing more of a social experience, walking through Commercial Bay or other related customers.
These locations that you mentioned, a lot of these areas that already have coffee window shops and coffee kiosks. So what do you propose we do if you can't find anything that meets that criteria?
So there's just too dense, the competition is too tough, and we should leave. Yeah, I think we can find smaller developments with like offshoots of corporate development. Like if there is a saturation of competition in terms of coffee window shops, my guess is it's a pretty developed area, and finding new developments. We've also recommended apartment clusters, which typically don't have as dense of competition. This is where young professionals might be living close together. And so we believe that's a place to win if the actual places of work are unable to be met.
This goes back to maybe the first question again, but your slide number 3, I think, really good slide, I thought. It has a little chart of how do you want to be placed versus competitors. And did you consider, you might not have had time, but did you consider, okay, so it's very clear where you want to put the coffee in that. Do you really need a master franchise agreement to do that? In other words, could you not, if you committed yourself to, on your own, hitting that space on the premium convenience chart, is this Brazilian coffee firm really essential to achieving that place on that chart? Because it is. There's a whole bunch of costs associated with it that you've already answered the question on.
So yes, we do believe that it is essential. When we look at the competitors here, we can see that it's a pretty dense market, especially when it does come to premium convenience. So if you want to stand out, you need to leverage competencies built by the existing brand, which we saw, which is the coffee, which have operational logistics and also marketing opportunities that could enhance the overall launch into New Zealand. And therefore, you're able to leverage some of those strengths and enter a very competitive market, and you'll be able to do so by building off of previous success.
In your financials, I can't find a line on the royalty fees or the fee that the coffee charges per cup of coffee sold. I just want to check which line that's on.
Sure. So let's flip to the revenue appendix. It's at the very, very bottom because this is a royalty fee that we don't. You're talking about franchisees paying a master franchisor, right?
Thank you, team. Sorry, that is 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, team, and thank you to everyone who has attended the Champions. Thank you for your presentation, team, and thank you to everyone who has attended the Champions Trophy Finals. The judges will now leave the room for deliberation, and I will give a quick announcement about the People's Choice voting form.